For the first time in a long time, the weather in the village was good, the warm sun was shining and people were working in the fields. An old man walked through the entire village and carried on his back a bag of vegetables that he had collected from the garden. A woman and her daughter walked through the entire village and carried warm bread on their heads to feed the people who worked in the fields. From the very morning, people were already sowing the fields and plowing the soil, they were trying to have time to prepare the field for the new season. But from that time on, one man sat on the sidelines near the house and watched other people work. He realized that this profession was not for him. He was very thoughtful and recalled the mistakes of his youth, because of which he now had a lot of regrets. He blamed himself for the fact that when he was young he had to lie about having mastered the martial arts of Murim. Once upon a time, he came to the village of Wachon and told people that he was a 17-year-old student of Muyin Moon, and people believed his lies and realized that this man could stop the robberies and protect them. He only strongly believed in his lies that he was playing too hard and in fact began to consider himself a martial arts master. But his lies were not as dangerous as people might think, because he actually devoted 40 years of his life to studying martial arts. Every day he tried new techniques and honed the martial arts techniques he already knew. He ideally had several combinations that allowed him to fight against strong opponents. One of the techniques was called step forward and 10 back. But the man often thought that the people around him were deceiving him much more than he was deceiving them. A man sits in a house and drinks alcohol. Next to him sits an old man who tells him that it is better to leave the village and follow the warrior because the warrior knows a lot of people and following him would be a good idea instead of sitting here. But the man reacts with rejection to the words of this old man. He drinks. The alcoholic says that he does not have enough virtues to follow a warrior. The old man tells the man that he has several children without parents whom he must give to someone and asks the man to accept these children. The man refuses this offer and says that in a few years they will be able to provide for themselves on their own. The old man understands that he will soon die and the children may not survive if they are not given to the care of someone. The old man says that it is best if these children follow the warriors and therefore will not be able to learn something and earn their own food. The old man took out a bag of money and handed this bag to the man. He said that this is all the money he has that he is ready to give so that the warrior can take his children. The warrior looked at this old man in surprise and thought that he had no conscience at all if he was offering money to give away his children. He saw that the bag contained silver and iron coins, maybe a good reward for taking responsibility for these children. But when they went outside, he saw that there were as many as 6 children standing near the stone fence. The man understands that he calculated that the money he took from the old man will not cover all the expenses for these children. He was upset for a moment and realized that he had been deceived because there were too many children and this money would not even be enough to feed them for 6 months. He understood that there was no turning back on the path and he needed to go to the end. Therefore, he told the children to follow him and went forward. The boy asked the other guys, "Is this man going to be their new grandfather?" The children began to follow the new grandfather and resembled small children who did not know what would happen next, they just followed the big mother duck. The old man who sold this war to the children watched them through the doorway. The daughter of this old man asked her father for a few people. He gave them to this hermit for the fact that he would simply take care of them on this day. The old man replied that in such situations you need to act according to the call of your heart and morals, therefore you cannot save on hermits, and he gave him as much money as he considered necessary. The woman said that this money was very important for their family, but the old man interrupted her and replied that there were a lot of these children and they would need money so that they could eat. He no longer wanted to argue with his daughter and simply turned around and left, saying that this was all empty talk. But all that worried her at that time was that they would have to eat only one risk for a very long time. The hermit walked through the forest with his new children in the direction of their new home. They had been walking through the forest for several hours and I didn't understand where this hermit was leading them, they just blindly followed him in the hope that he would lead them to a new home. The man walked silently all the way and thought that a very big responsibility for these children now lies on his shoulders and he must make the right decision so that everything is okay with them. The children followed the old man, the oldest ones went first, the rest caught up with them. The younger children constantly communicated with each other and discussed everything they saw around them. He turned his head and looked at them to make sure whether they had time to follow him or were lagging behind. When he turned his head back forward, he saw a small obstacle ahead that could interfere with them. Ahead of them the road ended and they had to jump down from the cliff in order to go further. He approached the cliff and looked down in order to understand how much distance they needed to overcome to get out of here, but the cliff was small so it was possible to cross. The man was the first to go down and then began to help the other children go down. He took them in his arms and lowered them down. The older children helped the younger ones climb down the cliff. They stopped near the river so that the children could play a little in the river and have fun. The old man at that moment just wanted to sit and relax. They washed themselves in the river and played with the water. They really liked this place. The eldest child helped the steel children wash themselves and get themselves in order so that they were clean. The man looked at this guy and realized that he was the oldest of them, so you can rely on him and expect support from him. They reached a small polar forest in the center of which they lit a fire in order to spend the night here and wait for the morning. A little girl approached her grandfather and asked how long they still needed to go to their new home and then yawned. He also yawned when he saw her and said that in one night they would arrive at the place and could rest. The children were very tired after this hike and immediately all fell asleep next to their grandfather. The old man also closed his eyes and fell asleep. Another day and one night passed and they finally reached a new house, which was located deep in the forest near large mountains. Only one old man lived in this house and there were no beds, so the children had to sleep on the floor. He looked at how these children slept and thought that he brought them here with him in order to save them. But their food supplies are very small and therefore they will have to eat only bread for some time. When he took this money, he thought that he could buy himself good tasty wine, but now he understands that this money will be spent on food for the children. The man decided to pamper these children a little and bought several chickens which he cooked in sauce and served to them. The children were surprised when they saw 3 chickens on their table. They could not believe that they would eat such delicious food. They looked at their grandfather with a surprised look and realized that this grandfather loves them very much since he brought them so much delicious food. He smiled and said in a loud voice that they should eat this chicken instead of looking at Grandpa. These children had never seen so much meat in their lives and all they had to eat in their short lives were just small pieces of meat that were given to them. The old man told them not to waste their time and eat the chicken while it was still hot. He was glad that these children liked the food he prepared. The children greedily ate the chicken that their grandfather gave them, each ate it in their own style and rejoiced at this food. The old man watched these children from the side and was glad that at least today they could be happy because soon they would not have so much food. After a couple of weeks, their food became much less, so the old man had to eyeball how much rice they would eat today. First of all, I used rice, which was going to spoil soon, and therefore I decided that I needed to cook it. But this rice was only enough for a few days and because of this the old man was upset because these were his main food supplies. He took out another bag of rice, which he considered a reserve, and poured it into the cauldron in which he was going to cook this rice. He thought that in this way he would clear his karma and in his next life it would be counted as a good deed. This time he prepared eggs for the children, which he managed to buy at a cheap price at the market. The children barely ate these eggs and they thought it was very tasty. Each of them handled the food in their own style. Some tried very carefully to open and clean the egg, and some played around and fought with the food. They constantly communicated with each other during dinner and played while eating. The old man watched these children and noticed that their weight began to increase. Despite the fact that their food supplies were running out, these children still gained weight and became healthy. He took them to the river so that they could play among themselves and feel happy. While the children were playing in the river, Asterix could go to the market and buy fresh corn there. He brought it to the children and told them to stop playing in the water if there was corn. They ate this corn and it turned out to be very tasty. Some children fought with heads of corn. He watched them and realized that every day he spends next to these children brings them closer and he begins to love them. Night fell. The moon illuminated the earth like a big lantern. Grandfather gathered all the children in the room and decided to tell them a bedtime story. The story was about a tiger who saw his prey and ran to hunt it. He parented this tiger very well and said that if the children do not go to bed then this tiger will eat them. The children were very frightened by such a fairy tale and immediately hid under the blanket so that the evil tiger would not find them. Grandfather started laughing when he saw that the children were so scared. He said that they need to go to bed otherwise this tiger will come and eat them all. They were very scared by this story and immediately hid under the blanket and said that they would immediately go to bed. He lowered his head down and thought about the fact that their food supplies were running out very quickly and he planned to stretch out the food for a few more days. But everything turned out to be much worse than he had planned. The children immediately fell asleep after Grandpa finished telling his story. They were very scared and tired, so they easily managed to fall asleep. He went up to each child and covered him with a blanket. At that moment, he thought that he would do everything possible to ensure that these children never go hungry and feel good. A new day has begun, clouds floated across the sky like ships. The old man gathered all the children near the house and said that today they will have to find a new home for each child. He asked them not to worry, because the people with whom they will live may seem evil to them. But this is only at the beginning, and then they will become a family for them. He looked at the eldest child whose name was Song Yu and thought that there was a blacksmith in the city who could take him as his apprentice. This guy I was still a child but nevertheless, he has a very strong physique and tenacity, these qualities could be useful for a blacksmith, he could be taught everything. He looked at the girl whose name was Yunshin and thought that this girl could be sent to a woman named San Hyaru. He understood that meeting this woman could be very dangerous because he had to give her the money but he had no other choice. He looked at the third child, who was the smartest of all the children, and thought that he could be sent to a tavern to help there and then the child would never go hungry. He understood that he was giving them only because in this case a better life would await them and people who could provide for them could look after them. He said that he no longer has time to be here and needs to go to the city to find new families for the children. He arrived at the place and looked from the top of the mountain at the city that was in front of him. He stood on the edge of the cliff and saw in front of him many buildings in this city. It was his favorite place because from here he could see all the houses. When they approached the city, they heard very loud blows of a hammer on an anvil. The blacksmith worked with his hammer and various tools and created new tools for working in the field. At that moment he was making a new sickle for a man who was working in the field. An old man and his children approached the forge and wanted to talk to the blacksmith. He hit the iron sickle with his hammer and tried to achieve the best possible shape for this tool. The old man approached the blacksmith and greeted him. He said that they had not seen each other for a very long time and he was incredibly glad to meet his old friend. This blacksmith's name was Chan and he looked incredulously at the old man who came to visit him. He was not happy to see him, but the old man still tried to be friendly and asked how he was doing. Chan didn't immediately understand that this man was here for a reason and answered him that he didn't need a worker because he was doing a good job. But the old man understood that he needed to persuade the blacksmith to take on a new apprentice and said that he had a very smart guy who could learn everything very quickly. Chan replied that he didn't need a new worker and there was no work for a blacksmith in the city anyway, much less for an apprentice there was definitely no work to be found. The old man continued to persuade the blacksmith to hire the boy. He tried to explain all the best sides of this boy. But Chan didn't want to listen to anything and simply hit his hammer on the hot sickle in order to even out its shape. He didn't understand how else he could get the attention of this blacksmith. He tried all possible ways to convince him. Chan was starting to get angry because this annoying old man kept trying to persuade him and wouldn't leave here. The children were very worried when they watched this blacksmith. He seemed to them a very scary man. Chan repeated once again that there is no work in the village for the Kuznetsov, he does not need an assistant, but the old man asked just to listen to him. He showed this boy to the blacksmith and said that his name was Song Yu and asked the boy to say hello to his new mentor. The old man said that this is my boy, only 8 years old and his body is not yet strong enough, but if you train him for several years, he will be a good helper and in the future he will be able to become a blacksmith. Chan looked at this guy with a very attentive gaze, he tried to assess this boy's abilities in advance and thought that this could really be a good assistant. The old man looked at the blacksmith and said that this guy Song Yu is a very conscientious and persistent boy, so he will be a good helper. The old man convinced the blacksmith that he would not be able to cope with all the problems alone for a very long time, he would still need an assistant. He said that if this boy is raised well, he will be useful in his work and the blacksmith will not be lonely. The old man said that he could only trust Chan and leave this child to him. Chan closed his eyes and understood that at that moment he needed to make a very important decision. The old man looked at Song Yu and told him that now he would live with this blacksmith and this was his new mentor, but the boy did not want to leave his grandfather. The old man reminded the boy about their conversation near the house and said that it would be better for him if he lived with a new mentor. And for him it would be good because he would have a new skill that would help him earn money for living in the future. The boy was upset because his grandfather wanted to give him to this man and began to pull his sleeve. The old man understood that he needed to show courage and not succumb to childish manipulations, so he pulled out his hand and stepped aside. Song Yu watched as his grandfather left him and took the rest of the children to leave here. He started crying and asked his grandfather not to leave him and to take him with the rest of the children. Song Yu promised that he would behave well and do absolutely everything that grandfather said. He said that he would even eat less if necessary. The old man stood and listened. And all this and his heart was breaking because he was about to abandon the child. The old man began to cry, but he tried to show me his tears so that the children would not see them. He said that he was not abandoning the boy, but was trying to show him a new way to survive for a better life. He started urging the children forward and saying that it was time for them to leave here. Song Yu began to cry and could not stop his tears. He begged his grandfather not to abandon him and not leave him alone here because he was very scared. The boy said that he will eat very little and will help his grandfather with all the housework and may not play at all, but he does not want to stay here. The old man turned his head towards the boy and said that no one was abandoning him, but that they were only trying to help him. He said that it would be better for him. The grandfather tried to explain to the boy that this man is the best blacksmith in the area and if Song Yu is his assistant, then in the future he will be able to earn his living from this craft. But Song Yu didn't want to listen to anything, he just wanted to return home with the rest of the children and live next to his grandfather. The old man could not look at how this boy was crying and came closer to him in order to calm him down. Suddenly, absolutely all the children who were nearby began to cry. They could not come to terms with the fact that their brother would now be taken away from them forever. The old man looked at how all the children began to cry and could not understand how to calm them down. And he felt uneasy because they were so upset. The first child ran up to his grandfather and hugged him and cried. He said that he would behave well and eat little but only so that Song Yu would stay with them. On the other hand, a girl came up to him and took his hand. She cried and looked into her grandfather's eyes, trying to persuade him not to give up their friend. Grandfather started crying and tried to explain to the children that no one was abandoning them and that he was just trying to find them a better life. He sat down on the ground, lowered his head down and said that he was trying to give them the opportunity to be well-fed and live a normal life because with grandfather they would starve. A girl approached him and began to wipe away her grandfather's tears with her hands. Un-chun said that grandpa doesn't have to worry about food because she will soon grow up and be able to take care of grandpa and the rest of the kids herself. They all ran up to the old man and started hugging him and asked him not to let them go because they love grandfather and don't want to go anywhere. He hugged them all and sobbed, trying to explain that if they didn't go with him now, then they would have to starve and cover themselves with a straw bedding in the winter. In the end, grandfather's heart could not stand it and he melted and decided to take them all with him and not give them to anyone. He said that no matter how hard it was for them, they would still come up with something. They returned home when it was already night. The children were very tired after this hike and they immediately fell asleep when they came home. While the children were sleeping, the old man decided to open the bag of money and see how many coins they had left. He remembered that the blacksmith gave him a bag of money and said that when the boy grows up, he is ready to take him as his assistant and gives this bag of money to feed this child. He went to his room in which there was a large wooden chest. The old man opened this chest and inside it he found a small box that stood right in the center of this chest. He lifted the lid of this box and looked at the contents that were in it. Inside the box there were gold coins and jewelry. There were not many of them, but this was enough for the old man to buy a small field not far from his house and be able to grow food there. This would be enough for them to live. He sat down on the floor next to him. A candle was burning and the old man understood that now the whole meaning of his life lay in these children. He wanted to do everything possible so that they grew up happy people. His only regret was that he had not been able to prepare properly before taking on such a large number of these children, and now he would have to come up with a plan to fix everything. He complicated his task by taking 2 more new children when he was in the city, and now he understands that it was a big mistake. But if he had not taken them, they would have simply died. He stopped being upset and remembered that no one but him was ready to take these children and realized that he needed to save so that they could not survive and live normally in the future. Morning came and the sun was just beginning to appear. It was still very early on the horizon and there was a slight fog near the house. The old man came into the children's room at dawn and said that morning had already come for them to wake up. They were surprised that grandfather woke them up so early. After all, they were not used to getting up at such a time and wanted to get some more sleep. The smallest girl who was recently taken into their group could not wake up and all the children tried to wake her up. But it was pointless. Song Yu asked the other children not to wake up this little girl because she is still very little. The teacher said that she needs to sleep well. While she was sleeping and the other children were clearing out their sleeping places and tidying up the room, the teacher gathered all the children on the street and lined them up in one line. They were still very sleepy and did not understand what was happening. When they saw the teacher in front of them, they did not bow to him and greeted him, but the smallest child did not know the rules and greeted his grandfather differently than everyone else. Bok Gu explained to this child that now he can't call the old man grandfather and all children should call him teacher. He immediately corrected himself and bowed and greeted his teacher once again. The teacher praised the new student and asked him if he slept well today. Chan replied to the teacher that he slept well and felt great. The teacher looked at all the children and said that now they can start training because he saw that they were already ready. Today the teacher gave them a task to practice even with a fist. He taught basic martial arts techniques and wanted them to learn how to defend themselves. Martial art, this is all that the master could do, and that's why he decided to teach his craft to children. He showed them every movement and the children repeated after him. When he finished the combination, he immediately started it again and the children had to repeat this until they started to succeed. At some point, after several hours of training, they still began to get punches and were able to remember the combination. At some point, children who were older began to learn military techniques faster, but those who were younger began to forget what they needed to do. He thought that these children would need to be counted according to seniority. After all, it would be more convenient to watch them and teach them. He faced a problem because Wu Ram was the eldest child, but Song Yu is better able to cope with these tasks and Song Yu has leadership qualities. They trained almost all day and teacher said that now the time has come when I can't rest. He taught them a breathing technique that would help their body restore strength and the children tried to master this technique. He asked them to take a short breath and exhale long. And even if it was hard for them, they still needed to calm down and try to do exactly as he said because this could help them in the future. Each of them understood the task that grandfather gave them in their own way, but nevertheless, everyone tried hard to complete these tasks and learn everything that grandfather said. The teacher taught this breathing practice to children so that they could not get rid of illness. It was the safest breathing practice. Xiu Yo was the youngest student and she slept through the entire training session because she was very tired lately. Grandfather prepared a bowl of rice for the children. It was the only food they could afford, but nevertheless he tried to make it tasty. He took the spoon in his hand and told the children that they could start eating and wished everyone a bon appetit. One guy was very hungry and he ate a bowl of rice so quickly that the rest of the children hadn't even started eating yet. The teacher was very surprised when he saw that this boy ate his food so quickly. He realized that this child was very hungry. He decided that he would give him half of his food so that the boy would have a normal dinner. He understood that if he skimped on food and fed them only rice, then their muscles and bones would not grow, so he had to find a job for himself and decided to soon go to the city to look for this job. Song Yu saw the teacher leaving the room and asked him to stay because he wanted to talk about important things that worried him. The boy was embarrassed to talk about it, but he still asked his grandfather not to make him a senior student. The teacher was surprised by this decision and wanted to know why the boy was asking him about this, and Song Yu said that Ram is older than him and he deserves to be the eldest student. The teacher replied that he determined the rating not by age based on leadership qualities, and Song Yu is the eldest student because he is the best suited for this position and the rest of the students are distributed by age. The boy did not understand why his grandfather decided to give him such a position and how he was different from other children. The teacher said that he distributed the children according to positions as he sees fit in accordance with Myun Moon, and all children must treat the older student with respect. They all listened to their teacher and nodded their heads in agreement. They said that they would respect and treat Song Yu. Everything the old man did was just to make them feel good. He understood that all these children are from different families, so they can go astray, but when there is a connection between the students, everything will be different. He remembered that once he was also the elder head of the clan, but he decided not to tell this to the children because they would start laughing at it. They collected water from the big iron casinos in buckets so that they could have drinking water. Song Yu was the first to fill the bucket with water and made sure that all the other children did not have problems with it. But one boy had trouble getting water into a bucket. His hands were very weak and he didn't have enough strength to hold the bucket. The fifth student began to call the second student names because he was unable to fill the bucket with water. Song Yu scolded the fifth student and said that this is no way to communicate with younger brothers, and if something doesn't work out for them, you need to help them. The fifth student was dissatisfied with the fact that this guy always carries very little water, unlike the others, and because of him the others have to work twice as hard. Song Yu said that one should not scold the second student for the fact that something does not work out for him, because he is more important in terms of seniority and one should not underestimate his importance. Song Yu walked with the second student and carried water in buckets home. Song Yu told the second student that he had good talent in writing and decided to offer him a new lesson. He said that the rest of the students did not know how to write and read, and therefore it would be easier for them to help the second student learn to read and write, and then he could teach everyone else. The second student said that he could carry water and learn writing, but Song Yu stopped him and said that everyone is good at one thing. Song Yu said that today the teacher will buy a book in the city and bring it home, and the second student will be able to learn writing instead of carrying water with the rest of the students. He tried to explain to the boy that if he studied grammar and learned to write then he would become a great man, but the boy did not understand how he would study it. Song Yu calmed the second student and said that everything would be fine, and the rest of the students believed in him. The teacher went to the big city to find at least some work here and earn money. In the city he found a building familiar to him called the tea house. He immediately decided to go there. A woman in a purple kimono was sitting in a tea house and trying to cool herself by waving her fan. It was very hot today. There was no one in the establishment except her, and she spent the whole day trying to fight with her wife who was on the street. She heard that someone came into the room and thought that it was a new client, so she immediately greeted him, but when she raised her head and saw that it was an unusual client. She saw a man who came to her in the establishment and immediately recognized him. It was her old friend Boyaka. He smiled when he saw his friend and said that he was glad to meet her again. She said that she had not seen him for a long time, although many people in this area knew about him, and asked why he was here now because people said that he quit his job. Boyaka said that he actually finished his work a long time ago. He completed his last order and retired. She smiled and said that not all people are able to retire from such a serious job, but she was glad that her brother was able to do it. He asked his sister how is her trade going. And she said that before it was better here because there were constant battles and wars, people came to her for tea, but now it's peaceful and calm here and there are no visitors. She replied that all the traders who were in this city for a very long time had to work for Murim. She said that crime in this city has been stopped since the new ruler came here. Because of this, new warriors do not come to her and she has practically no profit. She looked at the man and said that he most likely came here to find a job, and Boyaka asked the girl if she had any part-time work for him. She said that he doesn't work very much now in these parts, but she can find some kind of work for him, but she needed to know what difficulty of work he chooses. He said that he was ready to take on work of the highest complexity because he needed money, and the woman was very surprised by this answer. She didn't understand what was happening. Her brother always took on simple and medium difficulty tasks, but he replied that he really needed money now. She thought that he was a very strong man, but taking on a high-level job could be very difficult for him. She asked her brother when he was ready to start, and Boyaka replied that he was ready to start work at any time but asked to exclude assignments in other areas. She told him that she had one task, but it would only need to be completed in 2 weeks. Boyaka was glad that his sister found him a job and thanked her for this. He said that he could always rely on her. Boyaka could no longer linger here. He needed to go back to the children, so he thanked the girl again and went to the exit. She thought about the fact that she got married too early, and most likely because of this she is so worried about this big child. She was very surprised that Boyaka took on a high level of difficulty in completing the task. It was not like him. He returned to his home, and on that day the weather was beautiful, the sun was shining very bright, but thanks to the clouds it was not very hot. As the sun rises, dew begins to appear on the leaves of trees and bushes. Boyaka gathered all his students for a new training and ordered them to warm up. After training, they all went to a river that flowed near large rocks and began to play in the water. It was a very hot and pleasant summer that will forever remain in their memory. They played in the water and made life happy. It was a carefree time that will not always be remembered. The second student sat next to the teacher all the time and studied the books that his grandfather gave him. Boyaka decided to spend part of his saved money to buy a field. Now that autumn was coming, the children could harvest and sow this field. They grew little by little when autumn came and did not feel that the next year had already begun. In winter, children tried to stay indoors more and in order not to get sick and tried to warm each other. Boyaka spent all his free time with the children. He played with them, taught them something new and watched them grow. He was very happy that these children felt happy and was glad that their lives were getting better. Then night came, snow continued to fall from the sky and all the children were already asleep at that moment. The moon shone very brightly that night and illuminated the room of the second student. While the rest of the students were sleeping in their beds, the second student was studying books using natural light from the moon so that he could read. It came again, or did it mean that now is the best time to start working in the field? It was necessary to prepare the field in order to sow it, and for this I had to work all day long. Song Yu worked alone because he felt that he had a lot of strength and energy. The other children were resting at that moment and he took on great responsibility. He knew that in a few days he would finish working in the field, and when he received the money, he would be able to buy clothes for the youngest student and some paper for the second student. Suddenly he heard the voice of the teacher who called him to him. The boy was surprised that the teacher appeared here. He saw his grandfather standing in the forest and was glad to see him. Boyaka was also very happy to meet his senior student here and see that this guy works all day. Song Yu said that the teacher returned much earlier than planned and asked what this was connected with. The grandfather did not answer anything, he was just holding bags of food in his hands. Song Yu was very happy that the teacher returned earlier than promised, but suddenly he noticed something very strange. He saw that the teacher had a weapon cut on his hand, and what happened to him? Boyaka did not answer the guy's question and said that his hands would fall off to hold all these bags, so he asked the guy to take them for himself. Song Yu apologized for not immediately understanding that he needed to pick up the bags and helped his grandfather lighten his load. Boyaka asked the senior student what happened during his absence and were there any problems. Song Yu replied that everything was fine with them and didn't even know what to tell the teacher because nothing special happened. This news pleased the old man and he said that it was time for them to go home. Boyaka said that starting tomorrow he will help the first student work in the field. Song Yu was very concerned about the teacher's behavior. He acted very calmly and acted as if nothing had happened. But the boy still asked the old man one more time and asked where he got this fresh wound. The teacher said it was a minor scratch and not worth worrying about. Song Yu was very worried that every time the teacher goes to the city on business and then returns with a new wound. Boyaka didn't know what to answer to his student and simply decided to remain silent and look at the guy. He was very glad that this boy was worried about his health. He stroked his head with his hand and said that the guy had already grown up to take care of his teacher. Boyaka said it was just a small scratch, but if he didn't get it he wouldn't be making money and he shouldn't worry about it. The teacher said that he could carry the boy on his back like in childhood, but the guy refused because he said that he was no longer so light and it would be difficult for the teacher. Boyaka started laughing with the older student and said that when he was little and he constantly asked the teacher to carry him on his back. The teacher came home and showed the children all the purchases he had made in the city. They were delighted because there were jerky meats and many different interesting things. The children were very happy to see the teacher's return, did not hug him and tried to spend as much time with him as possible. Song Yu could not calm down. He was constantly worried about the teacher's health and did not understand why the teacher returned with a new wound every time. He noticed that the teacher always behaves the same way, no matter what difficulties he has to overcome. He gives the children absolutely everything he has and leaves nothing for himself. He can spend all his money and energy on students giving gifts and trying to make them all happy. But he himself constantly wears old things that should have been thrown out a long time ago and bought new ones, but he doesn't spend money on himself because he wants to make his students happy. Many people would be afraid to walk around in such old and dirty things because they would be laughed at on the street. But the teacher prefers to buy the second student a new book instead of buying clothes for himself. Every day he is losing weight more and more and it is already starting to catch the eye. Anyone can notice that grandfather is spending all his energy on them. Song Yu thought about the fact that he wants to become an adult quickly and help his grandfather live a good life and help all his brothers. When he becomes an adult he will be able to repay his grandfather for everything he did for them and then everything will work out for them. Autumn had come and the leaves were falling from the trees and the weather was becoming very gloomy. The teacher again went on a new assignment and left his house. The senior student saw him off. Boyaka told the older student that it was already very cold outside and asked him to return home so that he would not freeze. Song Yu, I am very surprised that the teacher is going on a new assignment and will work all winter and autumn. Boyaka said that he should be grateful that they now have work, and besides, he was able to take a lot of rice with him and would not die of hunger during this time. Song Yu said that there is no point in the teacher going to work all winter because blacksmith Chan will take the boy to work starting next year. The teacher replied that this would happen later, but now they still need to earn money so that younger students can eat normally. Song Yu was very worried about the teacher and worried that nothing bad would happen to him. After all, he is already old. The teacher said that the book that the second student Ram is reading is already tattered and unsuitable for learning because he constantly works with it and the teacher wants to earn money to buy him new books. Song Yu was still worried about the teacher and said that his health was no longer the same as before. He could harm himself if he worked all winter. Boyaka was very glad that the older student was so worried about him, but nevertheless he said that everything would be fine and for him it was not difficult. He patted the older student on the head and told him to take care of the younger students because now he remains in charge here. The teacher told her that the older student could not look worried because the rest of the students would start to worry for no reason. After these words, he said goodbye to the boy and went on his way. Ram was sitting in his room when all the other students were already asleep. He was worried that the teacher had left again and did not know when he would return back. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had to succeed in learning writing in order for the teacher to be proud. He had to become the best in this matter and then teach all the other students. A lot of time has passed since the teacher left the house, the weather has become good again, spring has come. The students meditated every day in a large room under the guidance of a senior student. The fifth student was very distracted and prevented the other students from meditating because he tickled them. He asked the younger student how he was feeling and the boy replied that his stomach still hurt as before. The fifth student suggested that the boy tell his senior student about his stomach pain, but the boy refused because calling a doctor is very expensive and they don't have that much money. He tried to explain to the younger one that the older student should take care of the problems of the younger students. The fifth student asked the boy to tell him immediately when the younger one started to have a stomach ache. It was important for him that the younger one notified him about it. Song Yu asked all the other students to calm down and focus on training. The younger students felt very guilty for being distracted from training and disturbing others. Song Yu that day also could not concentrate on practicing meditation because various thoughts entered his head and distracted him. He understood that the teacher should have returned, but he still hasn't. It's been a long time and something could have happened to him. Song Yu was worried about this because they were running out of food and had no money to buy new food. He decided to tell the rest of the children the news that he heard from the village people. They say that the barbarians are now attacking the village. The children were very scared and they heard that the barbarians could attack their village. Song Yu said that these barbarians are ruthless non-humans and kill everyone who gets in their way. For them it doesn't matter at all who is in front of them, an old man, a woman, or children. They treat everyone the same and kill and rob. He told me the younger students that there was no teacher next to them now and therefore they needed to be especially careful and he understood that the protection of the rest of the students rested on his shoulders. He said that Un Chun, Yul and Jung should stay at home all the time and take care of the order in the house. After that, he looked at the fifth student and said that he and Bok Gu would work together to get water and firewood, even though it would be very difficult. Bok Gu didn't like this idea because it would be very difficult for two to carry water and handle firewood, and he asked what the second student would do during this time. Ram felt very awkward sitting at the table. Everyone paid attention to him and he realized that he was doing the least amount of housework. Song Yu said that the second student should study writing and go to Soton. He needed to study and had no time for other activities. Bok Gu was very unhappy with this decision because he would now have to work twice as hard as before. Ram felt like the most useless student and invited the eldest student to help them. But Song Yu said that the second student should teach the others how to write. Song Yu missing even one day of school will slow down his learning for a whole year and therefore he should not miss classes. He understood that if the second student did household chores, then he would have no time to study at all. Song Yu forbade the girls to go outside. This was a new rule in this house. He was worried that something might happen to them and could not put them in danger. After that, he expressed everything he needed and said that they could start eating. The children were very hungry after a hard day at work and very quickly barely ate the food that the senior student gave them. Night fell and the moon again began to illuminate the earth like a large lantern. Song Yu decided to visit the second student at night. At that moment Ram was studying a book. Ram asked his older brother why he came so late because it was almost morning and Sun Yu replied that he had a lot to do if he didn't level the ground in the fields now and then it would be too late. Ram said I can also help the older student and do everything you can. Song Yu said that they had already discussed this topic and the second student should study books because this is much more important. Song Yu asked the second student why he still did not go to bed and Ram answered him that he hardly moved today so he was not tired. Song Yu asked the second student to go to bed and rest because he needed to gain strength to study books and sleep at least 4 hours. Ram said that he was very worried about the older student because he sleeps very little. But the guy told him that a strong body is all he has and he must have time to work in the field so that they have food. Song Yu said that he is very concerned about the health of the younger student because he now has a fever and needs to show him to the doctor. Song Yu began to change clothes and said that the younger student gets a fever every time after training and he knows that no one wants to tell him about this so as not to bother him, he will still need to be taken to the doctor. Ram was very surprised when he saw the muscles of the senior student. He could not believe that this guy had pumped up so much during this time. Song Yu worked alone in the field from the very morning to prepare the land for new sowing. He worked almost without rest in order to get everything done. His body was very strong and he was able to work for a long time. He perceived work on the field as a separate type of training in which he strengthens his body. He said that it was much more effective than just standing in the equestrian position all day. He thought about the fact that younger brothers are constantly learning something new and becoming better. But for now he is still the strongest student because he is older than them. Suddenly the guy heard strange sounds coming from the forest. He immediately paid attention to them and decided to see what was happening there. Song Yu hid on the ground so that he could not be noticed. Thus, he tried to follow the people who were approaching him. He saw that masked warriors began to approach their village. They were armed with spears and rode on horses. The horses galloped very fast and there were many of them. The leader of the barbarians informed the rest of his warriors that they must find the girl today. Song Yu looked at these people in fear and realized that these were the same barbarians that the people in the settlement were talking about. He understood that this was very bad news because the barbarians were already very close to their home. He became very interested in what girl they were talking about, who they wanted to find. Song Yu realized that they had already run far enough and could continue working on the field because he had no time to waste. The sun was directly in the center of the sky and it was the hottest part of the day. Song Yu heard strange sounds again. He realized that some person was approaching him. And he decided to look at this person. It was a tall beautiful girl with long white hair wearing red-black clothes. She was very upset and worried about something. Her red eyes were cast down. Song Yu was very scared when he saw this girl here. He understood that it was dangerous to be here. He tried to stop her and said that she couldn't be here and it was better for her to leave here as soon as possible. She didn't understand why this boy was so worried about her being here, but the guy didn't have time to explain it to her. He took her hand and began to drag her along and said that this was a very dangerous place for her and he would try to explain everything later. He took the girl to a barn that was located not far from the field and said that it was better for her to sit here and not make a sound. Song Yu asked this stranger to stay here and not come out, because it would be better for her. She listened to the boy's words and did not sit in this barn. But I still didn't understand why he hid her here. Song Yu didn't want the barbarians to notice this girl and do something bad to her. He continued to work on the field and pretended that nothing had happened. He still needed to level a lot of land in order to prepare it for the season. The sun began to approach the horizon, which meant that evening would soon come. Song Yu again heard a herd of horses approaching in the distance. He understood that they were barbarians. They returned back and could not find who they were looking for. Suddenly the leader of the barbarians saw a child working in the field and thought that he could talk to him. He ran up to him on his horse and stopped, then asked the boy if he had seen a woman here. Song Yu said that he works in the field all day and hasn't seen any woman here. The barbarians began to communicate with each other and discuss a girl who should be somewhere nearby. They said that they had never seen such a beautiful girl before, so they wanted to get her. The leader of the barbarians did not personally see this girl and heard about her only from stories from his soldiers and asked one of the barbarians how beautiful she was. The warrior who saw her said that this is the best girl he has ever seen. One of the barbarians got down from his horse and approached the boy. He told him that if the boy was lying to them about the fact that he had not seen the girl, then they would kill him. Song Yu was very scared when he heard this barbarian shouting at him but still said that he didn't see anyone here. This answer made Varvara very angry and he raised his hand to the boy. He hit the guy in the face with his palm as hard as he could. Song Yu felt very strong pain from this blow and flew to the side. He fell to the ground and the barbarian at that moment said that this boy was lying to them because there was no other road here and it definitely had to pass here. The barbarian was sure that this boy was not telling the truth, because of this he wanted to kill him right here and now. Song Yu continued to hide the truth and answered the barbarians that he actually did not see anyone here and tried to prove to them that he was not lying. But the evil barbarian did not like this boy's answer and he began to kick him. While this scumbag was beating a weak boy, the rest of the barbarians watched this and laughed. The leader of the barbarians said that this guy is the biggest scumbag from their gang because he beats women and children. Song Yu continued to receive blows from this barbarian but still did not tell the truth because he was worried about what they could do to this woman. At that moment the girl was in the barn and through the doorway she saw everything that was happening on the street. She watched how these barbarians beat the boy, but he still continues to be a doctor and does not talk about where she is. Song Yu tried to cover his head with his hands so that it would not hurt him so much, but they still continued to beat him. The barbarian said that this boy, apparently, really didn't see this girl, maybe he was so stupid that he just didn't notice her. The leader of the barbarians said that they cannot waste any more time on this stupid boy and need to find this girl as quickly as possible. They went further in search of this girl. The boy at that moment was lying on the ground and was in very severe pain. He lay on the ground and trembled because his body hurt very much after Varvara knocked him down. The girl who was hiding in the barn finally realized that she could come out and decided to approach the boy. She sat down next to him and began stroking his shoulders with her hand to make him feel at least a little better. She said that this boy is already the second person who tried to protect her and suffered for it. She turned her head back and saw that the barbarians had already run away very far and were not even visible on the horizon. Night came. That night there was a month in the sky and there were hundreds of stars around it. In the barbarian camp that night there was a meeting. Bright lights were burning, all these thugs gathered in one place. One barbarian sat in the center of them and everyone else stood around him and watched him suffer. The rest of the barbarians laughed at this guy because he told them about a beautiful girl, but they never found her and because of this he was punished. The leader of the barbarians drank alcohol from a bottle and said that because of this idiot he had to ride horses all day to swallow dust and all this was to no avail. The leader of the barbarians accused this guy of slander in front of everyone because he dared to collect information about a girl who in fact they could not find. But suddenly in the distance a silhouette of a beautiful girl appeared who was approaching the central gate. The barbarian who was accused of lying and beaten turned his head to the side and saw this girl. He shouted to all the other barbarians that this was the girl he saw this morning and she had now come here. For the other barbarians, it was very surprising that at such a time a girl decided to come here absolutely. She was very calm and was not afraid of these barbarians. She came here all alone and it was a very strange act from a girl. The barbarians began to behave like natives when they saw such a beautiful girl in their camp. She came out to the center and the camp and stopped. The girl turned her head to the side and looked at the barbarian with a beaten face who was sitting on the ground. She immediately understood what was happening here but still behaved very calmly, despite the fact that these barbarians looked like wild monkeys. The leader of the barbarians looked at this girl and could not take his eyes off her. Drool was flowing from his mouth and he asked where such a beautiful woman appeared in their camp. She counted all the savages who were in this camp and said that there were 54 people here and not one of them could escape from here. The leader of the barbarians asked this girl what she meant but immediately after 1 second his head was cut off. She killed the leader of the barbarians in front of all the other members of this sect. They did not understand what was happening and therefore immediately began to grab their weapons and run to attack her. With quick blows of the sword, all these barbarians were destroyed in a few seconds. They didn't even have time to understand anything. In fact, the girl did not come here on her own and she was in the company of experienced warriors who were masters of the sword and killed all these barbarians like real professionals. One barbarian whom the rest of the barbarians just wanted to execute remained alive and watched as all the members of his gang were killed in an instant. She came closer to this barbarian and he began to shake with fear. he understood that something very terrible was about to happen. She leaned closer to him and said that she would have a completely different conversation with this scumbag and she wanted to talk to him separately. And when he heard this, he became so scared that he turned pale and realized that a very terrible torture awaited him. The sun came out from behind the horizon and began, and she was already in sight behind the rocks. Song Yu woke up first. At that time the rest of the children were still sleeping. He felt that his body was in great pain after being beaten by this barbarian. It had already been several days since this event happened, but his body still hurt. Oh, looked at the rest of the students. He was very glad that they were sleeping so well and soundly. He was glad that these guys were resting well. But when he began to count all the students, he saw that one student was missing and was afraid because something could happen to him. But then he realized that the second student most likely woke up earlier than everyone else in order to go study new books, and the guy realized that he also needed to go to work. He took his tools and clothes to go to work in the field. He is already accustomed to the fact that he goes out to work on the field before everyone else, when the steel students are still sleeping, and returns when they are already asleep. Before leaving, he looked at the guys who were resting sweetly in bed and said that they, too, should work well today. The sun was already in the center of the sky and it was the hottest part of the day. Song Yu continued, as always, to work alone in the field and prepare the land for the new season in order to plant vegetables here. When he was working, he didn't notice that there was anyone else on the field besides him, but suddenly a girl appeared. She approached the guy and called him. The boy heard a woman's voice and turned his head towards her. He saw this girl and realized that this was the same girl that he had hidden from the barbarians. Because of her he had big problems. He didn't understand why she came here again, because it's very dangerous to be here. If the barbarians return, they'll have big problems again. She looked carefully at this boy and realized that this was the same hero who saved her, and he also very much reminded her of one person. This boy was very similar to her older brother whom she loved very much, and he remained in her memory. She asked the boy how he was feeling and if everything was okay with him, because he had committed a great stupidity when he protected her. She took his face with her hands and began to examine the monitor lizards. She said that because of his stupidity he could have died. Song Yu didn't understand why this girl said that because he saved her and thought that she would behave differently. She told him that it is not worth fighting with an opponent who is several times stronger than him, and that it is better to fall to the ground and just hide until he becomes stronger than the enemy. Song Yu didn't understand why this girl was talking like that. Everything he was thinking about then, this or that to save their lives. She said that this boy has people he must protect, and such a brave act could harm the people who depend on him. Song Yu thanked her for the advice and bowed to her. The girl said that she had been watching him and knew that he was engaged in martial arts. He told this girl that he had a teacher who told him that he should not miss a single day of training. And the girl was very surprised that this boy had a teacher, and she asked what school he belongs to. He said that he studies the Million Moon School of Martial Arts and his name is Song Yu, and he is the 18th student of this school. She was very surprised when she heard the light of this boy's information. She immediately realized that their purr was a charlatan or a fake. Song Yu called this girl sister and asked her if she practices martial arts. She was very surprised that he called her sister and asked why he said that. He laughed and started scratching his head. He told her that he couldn't call her grandma, and miss also sounded very strange. She started laughing, and I thought this boy was very cute and good, but I thought that he was a golden child. She was touched by the fact that this cute boy was talking to her so funny. She asked this boy to call her aunt, and this was very unexpected for Song Yu because he saw her for the second time in his life. She looked at him and thought that she definitely wouldn't be a grandmother for him because she was still too young, but her aunt was best suited in this situation. She smiled and said that since she is already an aunt to him, then she will have to take care of her nephew, and Song Yu at that moment felt very awkward. She asked the guy to show his skills in martial arts because he so confidently stated that he was a student of the Million Moon School, and she was interested to see what he was capable of. She asked him if he was ready to show his skills in martial arts. Song Yu was delighted and said that he would be happy to show her everything he knew. He was very glad that someone was interested in seeing his abilities. The boy began to accumulate chi energy in himself in order to fill his body with the right energy. He began to move his right hand and prepare it for an attack. He clenched his hand into a fist and began to feel the strength in his hand. Song Yu showed the combination of blows that the teacher showed them. He knew this combination better than others. Ant carefully watched the boy's movements and analyzed his technique in martial arts. She found this boy very interesting. Song Yu began to make movements with his legs and showed the blows that he had learned. He concentrated all his attention on these blows and did not worry about the fact that someone was watching him. His movements were very clear and fast. After he finished his combination, he got into a fighting position and began to accumulate energy. The ant saw how the boy tried to show her the blows that he learned from his teacher, but she understood that this was absolutely not a martial art, but just strange movements. She was very impressed that this boy spends a lot of time training every day and puts his soul into this activity, but he only managed to learn the basics of martial arts. He said that he can't fight very well with his bare hands, but with the help of a stick he fights better, and the girl said that this is very good and praised him. Song Yu was very surprised when this girl praised him, and he asked, "Is he really worthy of praise?" She answered him that her aunt had never lied to anyone in her life and said that the boy's breathing technique was similar to the Taoist technique. She saw that his martial art is nothing special, but he is very proud of it. If she tells him the truth, she will obviously be upset. She understood that his teacher did not understand anything about martial arts, but he worked correctly with the spirit of this boy. She asked him if he wanted to know something very interesting. Song Yu was very interested in this proposal and replied that he was looking forward to his aunt telling him this. She said that if the boy slightly changed the breathing technique that he had learned, he would fight much better, his movements would become clearer. She put her hand on his stomach and asked him not to worry and just trust her. Auntie told him to inhale air when she presses her hand on his stomach and exhale air when she removes her hand. He felt very strange because he had known this girl only recently and she was already helping him master his breathing. She pressed her hand on his stomach and he took a breath. Then Nu pressed his stomach again and he took another breath. Her hand began to glow with a bright light and she once again pressed his stomach and asked him to take another deep breath. After that, she removed her hand and said that now he could finally exhale, and the boy exhaled. She said that if he remembered the breathing pattern and trained it, he would be able to feel something rising through his body. The aunt said that the boy should feel this something inside himself and work until this something rises to his head. All this time he must continue to breathe and not worry about the fact that something might go wrong, he just must train and work. She said that the most difficult thing is patience, but if he can constantly train it then he will have good results. She raised her hand up and said that he would succeed, and when he was able to free himself, he would feel completely different. Song Yu didn't understand what was happening now, it all looked very strange, and for some reason this girl was helping him. He was watching how she was moving now, it looked very interesting. He watched the movement of her hands and it seemed to him that she was moving very quickly. She hit her palms on the ground and a dent appeared in the ground. These are her hands. Song Yu understood that he needed to have incredible strength in order to leave such a large dent in the ground, and he did not understand how such a fragile girl was capable of such a thing. But she continued to move her hands and show him her capabilities. Her movements were so fast and clear that she was able to cause a very strong flow of wind that threw the guy to the side. Song Yu was delighted when he saw that this ant was able to summon the wind from her palms. He said that he wanted to learn how to do this. She smiled and thought that it was possible to interest a child in such an easy way. And she told him that he could learn this if he trained his breathing, but he would have to work hard. Song Yu smiled and said that he would put a lot of effort into learning how to release the wind from his palms. She was very surprised that this boy was so active, he reminded her more and more of her older brother. She said that she could teach him several things that he could use in the future, and the guy was delighted that this ant was ready to help him. He thought it was the best day of his life.